Bernie nets a huge endorsement just in time for the debate. Also, how did all the candidates do last night? Our panelists, of course, have their own thoughts, and we want to hear them.
Joining us now, our Democratic strategist, council member at large in Montgomery County, Maryland, Will Jawando, and Tom Rogan. He's a commentary writer for the Washington Examiner. Welcome back to you both.
Gentlemen.
Good to be here.
Okay, immediate winners and losers is what we're doing last night. What did you think, Will? No thought, just go into it. No qualifications. Winners and losers.
Well, I think actually Joe Biden did okay.
Oh, God.
I'm not going to say he won. I think he did okay. Tulsi Gabbard was the loser.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think, Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg did well.
Okay, what do you think, Tom?
Yeah, well, I actually think
what happened?
I think Joe Biden did well to take that.
Where did we find these
What the
people?
hell is going on?
What debate did you all watch?
I think he seemed, he rebutted points.
Yeah.
He seemed energized. If the challenge for him is to show that he has the energy to go through to next year, I thought he did do that.
What if the challenge for him is completing one sentence in a comprehensible manner? How did he do on that?
Well,
on that measurement.
And yet he will be facing President Trump, right? In prospectively, whoever wins this is likely to be facing President Trump, and so President Trump's
he doesn't complete too many sentences.
Right, he throws out curveballs.
Yeah.
If Joe Biden can do that, maybe that's not what we would wish for our democracy, but it is that. And I think that as the loser, though,
he's no less incoherent than Trump. That's the pitch.
Elizabeth Warren, I thought, was the loser because I thought that specific point you guys were talking about earlier about her inability to articulate Medicare for all payments, and for the fact you saw very aggressively Klobuchar, Beto following the debate again, which you showed, this pressure campaign against her. I thought she had her worst night.
So this was obviously Bernie Sanders' first big event back after the heart attack. I think you talk about expectations being lowered. Pundits had been calling for him to drop out and all of this nonsense. He had, I thought, his strongest performance, not just of this campaign cycle, but of any of his debate performances. Let's take a listen to a little bit of what he did vis-a-vis Joe Biden.
You also got done, and I say this as a good friend, you got the disastrous war in Iraq done. You got a bankruptcy bill, which is hurting middle-class families all over this country. You got trade agreements like NAFTA and PNTR with China done, which have cost us 4 million jobs. And let's get to Medicare for all. Let's be honest. We spend twice as much per person as do the people of any other major country on earth.
Tom, let me go to you on this one. I thought that moment right there encapsulates the Bernie Sanders case for president better than maybe anything we've seen, and makes quite bare the choice between his vision and what he would do versus Joe Biden.
Yeah, he was compelling there with those arguments. Again, I think the sustaining problem with Bernie Sanders, though, for Democrats is the ultimate general election challenge that he would face in terms of how far to the left those programs are for a country that I still think is generally center to center right. But in terms of political, power, as one of those pundits who said he should drop out, I think he destroyed me there in that. He was, powerful. He was energized. He was angry in ways that appealed to, understandably a lot of
it was classic Bernie. I mean, if you're a Bernie supporter, you wanted to see him come back strong. He did that. He was clear on his message. He was concise, unlike Vice President Biden. He made his point strongly. I agree with Tom on that. And he passed that health test. And, and I know he's got some announcements coming. I know we'll talk about that. But I just think he might have topped out, though. I just don't know if, with the way the polls are moving, a lot of that movement on the progressive side is going to Warren. So he's got to kind of stem that tide.
But the interesting thing is, and we look at this closely, voters really don't vote in the ideological way that we think they're going to. So as an example, Joe Biden couldn't be further from Bernie Sanders, as was illustrated by that video. Then they're very far apart on the ideological spectrum, and yet their coalitions are more similar than anyone else on there. So I think the idea that the progressives are fighting it out, it's just not reflected in the way that voters are actually making their choice. So when I see that moment with Biden, I think he's positioning for, if Biden does fall, if he does slip, picking up a good amount of the working class Joe Biden supporters who may drift away.
And it was interesting the focus there on NAFTA, right, particularly, which
Right.
is clearly designed both for those
And TPP.
right, and for President Trump's base. So yeah.
That shows that crossover appeal, and that is
Right.
the real. Is if you have Joe Biden up there, this whole election will be Iraq, NAFTA, TPP. I mean, do we
Yeah.
really want to go through all this again? The country already decided. I don't understand, and frankly, he's not giving a very compelling case. I mean, Joe Biden had that moment where he's like, "I'm the only one who's actually done anything big." He couldn't even remember the things that he did on the stage. He fumbled his sentence.
Well, I will say, Joe Biden has fumbled for a long time. He fumbles. He's been fumbling for
fumbles a
years.
lot.
And I do think there is a, kind of an inside straight for him if it turns to national security, if it turns to foreign policy, where I think the public does have confidence. You may not agree with everything he's done, but he's been there, he's done it. And I think you saw him trying to make that argument. Like, look, with everything that's going on in Syria and all this, I'm the adult in the room. I've been in the Situation Room. Whether that works or not is another question.
Well,
but
it's a double-edged sword because on the other hand, Iraq War. I mean, not only did he vote for it, but he was chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and was, actively sort of making the case.
He's got a lot of baggage.
So there's baggage there as well. But big announcement, what we learned last night, Bernie Sanders on the stage teased that he'd have a special guest at this rally in Queens this weekend. We then found out, thanks to Washington Post reporting and confirmed by one of Sanders' advisors on our show last night, that AOC is the special guest, that she will be endorsing Bernie Sanders. He picked up endorsements from 2 other members of the squad as well. Will, how, do you think that this is significant? Do you think it changes the game for him?
I think it's a big endorsement. It's something he needed. The fact that you have 3 of the members of the squad coming out, women of color, younger members coming
Typical
out for
Bernie
him.
bros, right?
Yeah, right. Coming out for him, I think is going to be a big pickup. How active they are in the campaign? Are they going to really? Is this an endorsement?
Yeah.
Just an endorsement, or is it a? I would think from the rally, it's going to be an active endorsement. So, are they going to go around the country trying to get people excited around him? Can you get that energy from 4 years ago that he had with a lot of young people? I think that's what they're banging on, and they're going to need it, and especially in those early states.
Ryan Grimm said this on the show last night, where he was talking about how he really thinks that the heart attack or the blocked artery was really holding Bernie back, and that so much of the energy that we saw last night was something that he really could have done a lot better in this primary if he'd had this amount of energy in the preceding months. So Tom, I mean, he's got this AOC endorsement now. He's got this big bang up debate rally. This really is a point where he could be making the case to a lot of the voters who are starting to float from the other candidates and maybe even drop off from Joe Biden. I think it actually could really change the nature of the race if he plays it right.
Yeah, but I don't think he's going to win the nomination because, again, I think too many Democratic voters would decide, I think quite rightly, that would be a push too far to the left to beat President Trump. And ultimately, the Democratic predisposition, I think, is going to be getting someone who can beat President Trump. I also think, what would be interesting to see with AOC is that we talked about that idea of Bernie Sanders reaching out to, blue-collar workers, the NAFTA angle. Does AOC fit in with that narrative as the sort of more urban, intellectual side of the party rather than the nuts and bolts?
She was a waitress until quite recently. I mean, she talks about the working class as much as anyone. So there's, I don't know if you know this, there's a working class in the cities.
But the working class in New York City is not industrial jobs lost to China.
There's a lot of union workers who have lost their job in
and you
cities.
think AOC is the narrative for that?
Deindustrialization. I do. I think that I really do see it differently. I think she and Bernie and the sort of working class of America have a lot more in common. And look, you see it in Bernie Sanders' coalition. He's the only candidate who has actually put together this multiracial, urban, rural, working class coalition. And AOC is a big part of that.
That's the other thing. Can you get some of those voters of color, black voters in particular? If you still look at the early states, Joe Biden in some polls as of last week has 40% of the vote in South Carolina.
It's gone up.
And so it's not going down. And I think does this shake that up is going to be another big factor.
Sanders has been very strong with Latinos, though, in a lot of polls.
And
he's
young
been the number one
voters.
candidate and number one among young black voters. So it's a big generational issue.
All right, sit tight, guys.
Stick with us. More right after this.